Welcome to episode number 3 of the macOS app development series. My name is Harry. We'll talk about NSCollectionView today. NSCollectionView is one of the most commonly used UI components in modern macOS applications. It had a long way in existence and has updated with modern APIs since 2015. Many new APIs are designed with the experience in iOS UI collection view. You may find lots of similarities between them. In front of you is a simple application with 3 items in the NSCollectionView. Since my first attempt in making video tutorials, Apple has fixed a few bugs and issues. I will walk you through the process of creating this project and point out the fixes along the way. Here we can see a blank project I just created. We'll first head over to the storyboard to drag in our first NSCollectionView. Search it here and then bring in the collection view to the view controller. So here are a couple things that is fixed in Xcode by Apple since 2015. The first thing here is that by bringing in the NSCollectionView, it doesn't bring in the collection view item, which is a bug back in time. The second thing here is that as a modernized NSCollectionView, the default data source is changed. We can take a look. Like before, collection view is embedded in a scroll view, so we can open up the tree hierarchy and click collection view. And then if we take a look in the attribute inspector, now the default layout will be the flow layout instead of the legacy content array. So this makes the current NSCollectionView cleaner. The next thing we want to do is to connect this NSCollectionView, connect the data source delegate of this kind of NSCollectionView back to the view controller. We can take a look in the outlet and then drag the data source towards view controller. What we want to do is to ask the view controller to provide the data source to this NSCollectionView. Next, we want to go to view controller class to add the related data source protocol methods. We'll create an extension of view controller and implements this with the NSCollectionView data source protocol. In there, we want to provide 2 required methods. The first one is the number of items in session. This is required. Let's say we want to return 3 items. And then the next method, which is another required method, is this one. Item for representer object add. These 2 methods are the same since 2015. In here, we want to return the NSCollectionView item. What we want to do is to use the makeItem method from CollectionView. Here comes with another change, is this identifier part. In the past, it will ask us to provide a string, which would be the identifier back to the NSCollectionView item. Nowadays, it asks us to provide a wrapper, which is called NS User Interface Item Identifier. We'll skip it first and then put the index path here and return this item. We'll come back this later on, but now we are going to create that NSCollectionView item. We'll go to create a new file, choose Coca class. In here, we want to put the subclass as NSCollectionView item and check the box to create the zip file for the user interface. We'll give the name for our first NSCollectionView item. Let's say we call it label item or whatever name you want. Then create. It creates the Swift file and also the zip file for it. So like the past, we want to go in the zip file first and then create the layout for our wheel item. There are a couple of things we want to do. First, we want to resize the item. Let's say I want a smaller one, say 200 width and 50 height. And then I am going to put in the content. Let's start with just the label. The next thing is that I want to convert this simple view into a view item. In order to do that, we need to use something called object here. So the idea is that for this zip file, right now it's just a NS view, which would be the viewing part. It doesn't recognize it as a NSCollectionView item. Then we pull in this object, and we will use this object to define this current item nature. So we will set the class here to label item. At this point, the object here is the NSCollectionView item. And then this item lists a view. So we can connect the item to the view by dragging from the item to the view. And choose view. So now the zip file here collectively has the linkage, has the nature of the NSCollectionView item with the view link to the interface that we have in this zip file. Now we go back to the view controller, and this is the time to set up the NS User Interface Item Identifier. I will first create a static variable here. Let's say it is called label item with our label item string. This is basically the class name of our NSCollectionView item subclass. And then here I will be using this NS User Interface Item Identifier with an initializer raw value to our label item class name here, like this. So it's a bit long, but with this setup, it is now type safe, And if I am going to reuse the class name here, I can just point it to the static variable. So now let's run the application and take a look. Oops, it's empty. Let's take a look on what's happening. Right now we have the NSCollectionView, but it's blank. So we can go to the storyboard to take a look on the NSCollectionView first. In the attribute inspector, by setting it to flow layout, we have a bunch of attributes we want to set here. For instance, I noticed that I didn't adjust the width, so it keeps showing the item at 50 width. However, we have our item created with 200 width, so let's modify this and run the application again. So as you can see, it is now shown. We can also check the view hierarchy debugger in Xcode by tapping it here. So now we can see there are 3 items in our NSCollectionView. Each one, if we take a look on the size, each one has its width of 200 and height 50. And they are laid out according to the flow layout. This can only be done through the NSCollectionView data source protocol method. More importantly, it is done by this makeItem method. If you struggle with the items overlapping with each other, likely it was because you are not using the makeItem method here. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.